we'll have people joining us, and there's Kim. So we have a 50% crowd. We can get started whenever you're ready.
Great, yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So we'll let you start us off and give us a little bit of history about your brewery.
Well, I'll lead into it. Kim's always our great historian here. So we're actually in our 5th year anniversary week. You can't really have an anniversary party without going a whole week long. So we're doing special tappings each day, and those tappings were voted on by our Facebook fans. So we gave them a collection of beers that we served in each of the 5 years. They voted on those beers, and then Tyson, our lead brewer, went ahead and reconcocted them, and we're tapping them. So Kim can give us a little bit of the history real quick on the fun 5 years. And see this gray on the side of our heads? You'll see Tyson's too. We're pulling up all these old photos of our opening. There's no gray. So it's craft beer is good for weight gain and gray hair.
Yeah, among other things. Yeah, Paul said we, and actually let's show the other two who just joined us.
Good. Down here, we got Tyson Arp, brewer, lead brewer, myself, Paul Kavulak, Kim Kavulak, and way down here on the end, this super excited Sam Riggins, brewer. He just got a brand new brew kettle about moments ago.
So as Paul stated, we're in our 5-year anniversary week, and this 5 years has seemed to, after the first 2, I guess, flown by. The first 2 were proving ground for us in a lot of ways, both in the brew pub and in the industry. It was always sort of our intention just to be a great little brew pub who made really great beer and paid the bills, and that was sort of the plan as we set out 5 years ago. And then the economy sort of did a number to us, and Paul had to set to work on how we were going to stay relevant and stay alive during the economic downturn. So that led to our distribution efforts, both in Nebraska and across the country. So what you guys will be sampling today is a result of that effort. We started our barrel aging program with 2 barrels.
2 exactly.
2 barrels in-house and 1 beer, which we have renamed because the feds told us we couldn't call it Chardonnay Blanc because it was too confusing. So that is now what most people know as Mélange à Trois. And we added over time 4 beers to that lineup for a total of 5 currently. And we have, within the last week, decided we will be graduating 2 of our Inception Series beers into that Reserve Series lineup. So over the next year, hopefully, we'll have 7 beers total in that Reserve Series lineup.
And I think you have one of those newly appointed Reserve Series beers. Hopefully it arrived in a box intact, and we've responsibly, and Sexy Betty will pop up into the Reserve Series line.
Great, yeah, we do have it, and they arrived safely.
Good to know.
So what would you suggest we open first?
What do you guys have there in front of you? Because we tried to match what we thought you might have. We don't have all of the beers, but we got a good collection.
Well, of course, responsibly.
Well, you've got about the whole lineup.
Whole lineup.
We have 2 bottles of Responsibly that you sent us. We also have Hop God, Mélange à Trois, and Black Betty.
Well, we have Responsibly and Hop God, so I would recommend, actually, based on what you have there, probably start with Mélange à Trois.
Okay.
And we can kind of just, we've got this incredibly high-tech Lazy Susan, so we'll have Sam and Tyson chime in, and we'll point the camera at them, and they can chat a little bit about each of the beers.
Okay, great.
Sadly, I don't think we get to partake in Mélange à Trois with you. We don't have any currently in our stock.
We have a cellar's at the house, though. So I can give you a little bit of background on Mélange à Trois, and then we'll turn it to Tyson and get some input from Sam and let everybody play along here. But Mélange à Trois was our first experiment in barrel aging, and at the time we just thought it was a likely marriage between a great Belgian Golden Strong and the character of Chardonnay. So we got a hold of somebody in California. We paid way too much for a couple barrels, and we put the beer in the barrel, and that began the path down. Geez, we don't know what we're doing, so let's get a hold of all these other guys in the industry and get some opinions. So I'll turn it over to Tyson here, and then down to Sam, and we'll let them explain how we get there.
Okay, sounds great. Sounds great.
So this has been a fun beer for us to produce. When we started doing this with the Chardonnay barrels, at the time there weren't very many brewers, I don't think, that were using Chardonnay barrels. And if they were, they're generally trying to produce sour beers. And we were definitely never going after the sour side of things with this beer. So we broke a little bit of ground, I think. We were well rewarded with some medals at GABF as well as a Festival of Wooden Barrel Aged Beers. So people seem to like it. It's one of a kind, and we're flattered now to see more and more breweries picking up this style and buying Chardonnay barrels and trying their own hand at it.
Back to Sam very quickly. Motion sickness and
Sure. I guess what I can say about these beers is I wasn't really around when they were sort of conceived and started, but when I found out that this job was available, one of the things that was really exciting to me was the fact that these aren't sour beers. You know, we're letting the barrels kind of shine through in the beers, and I don't think that when we first started doing this, that there was a lot of that going on. So when I first started working here, that was really something that was really interesting to me, and it was just so different at the time. So I guess that's my little chime in there.
I think one of the things I love most about this beer is, and because it's first use French oak Chardonnay for us, if you're a wine lover and a beer lover, this is a great marriage of that. You really get a lot of in the nose, you get a lot of the tannins, the oak from the barrels, and you get a little bit of that in the mouth when in the first sip. So for people who say, especially for people who say they don't like beer, they prefer wine, this is a great beer to sort of introduce them into the beer world in some level, because it's such a great marriage of the two.
And it's created to be confusing. Go ahead.
This is Daniel Bradford. Yeah, I think you got the Chardonnay qualities coming through very, very strong. I wonder how you integrated beer ingredients, hops and malt, to complement the Chardonnay flavor. What were you thinking of when you did that?
Well, I'll go to high level. I'll get Tyson and Sam to get the technical side of it. But that Belgian yeast strain and the malted barley that's in there, that beer by itself, before a Chardonnay barrel, had an incredibly large pineapple character. And I was a cork dork before a beer geek, and that Chardonnay character and that pineapple essence, it seemed like a natural marriage. So that's what prompted the experiment. And then in terms of how you actually get the yeast to play along, we'll let the guys talk here.
Yeah, the yeast we use in this beer, we also use it in Hop God and a couple other beers. It's a rather challenging Belgian strain to work with. It has a kind of a mind of its own, but produces really wonderful tropical fruit aromas, a lot of really nice esters, which we love. And as Paul mentioned, we just thought, when we originally brewed this beer, we didn't necessarily, I don't know that we had the barrels in mind at the time, but when we tasted it, Paul made that connection in his mind that Chardonnay would work really well with it, and we just ran with that.
The dryness of the French oak just comes through so strongly but nicely at the beginning, just like you said.
It's interesting that you guys have two of our wine barrel aged beers. There's a lineage, and you can laugh and say, you know, we're reusing what we had before, but we experimented with other beers in the first use Chardonnay barrel, and we mentioned the number of uses per barrel. Mélange à Trois gets our barrel the first time because we want as heavy a dose of Chardonnay character as we can force into that beer. We then take the same barrel months later, well, as fresh as we can get it, but after we're done with it for Mélange à Trois, and we put Hop God into it. And the reason we're stepping down the barrels is because we're trying to impart a little less Chardonnay character in these other beers that might be a little bit more delicate. Hop God has a very complex nose, and actually after aging, Hop God's nose is actually gone. So Tyson and Sam blend back in a percentage of fresh Hop God to give it back its original Hop God nose. And then we have a third beer in the lineup or the lineage called Apricot à Poivre Saison, and we're attempting to impart just a very, very subtle Chardonnay character into that beer.
This is Mélange à Trois. What are the three?
Didn't hear the question.
What was the question, Dan?
It's called Mélange à Trois, right?
Yeah, we start with Mélange à Trois, we hit barrel-aged Hop God, and then Apricot à Poivre.
What are the three things?
Yeah, well, the three thing is play on words, and of course it isn't really meant to evoke thoughts of household of three, but it works, right? Melange à trois being blend of three, and it's very simple: oak, wine, and beer. So it comes together well. I honestly have no idea how we crapped out that name, but it stuck one day, and we used it, and it works well.
All right, thank you.
Very nice.
What beer should we move on to next? Hop God, Black Betty, or Responsible?
I'd say we turn to Hop God and then Black Betty. Yeah, let's go with Barrel Aged Hop God, and we can play along here in Nebraska with that one. So Kim will pop the cap on that, and we'll fill up our little tulip glasses, and we'll watch Kim pour the beers for us here. All across the United States, they're watching you and learning how you're pouring that.
Right?
Look, they have a Lazy Susan too.
Check it out.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
So this staff tasting that you guys have, I got to imagine there's nobody left in the company outside of that room and the beer, right?
Yeah, and we actually got a few that are sick, so they weren't able to make it. They're lost.
Absolutely.
See, Sam is returning. We're actually still in the middle of our operational day, so you might get a few of us coming and going here.
Now, how big is the system?
Our massive brewing facility is 10 barrels.
Fantastic.
And we laugh because we might be able to show it to you here in a minute if I can move the laptop, but it's a pretty small Czechoslovakian-made system, and we lucked out years ago when we bid on. This is actually the third system that we bid on. It was like trying to buy a used car. We thought you could bid on a brewing system and lowball them, and you'll be able to negotiate a little bit. And I did that twice, and the systems were purchased overnight. And I think they probably looked at my bid, but those systems came and went, and we were very fortunate. This one came up. It was idle in Japan. I honestly don't know how it idled up, but it had been in use for about 2 years. It was incredibly scary because we got it before it had been listed. So it made us worried that we'd be paying too much for it. We bid on it and it was accepted, and that made me even more nervous. But what's really cool is it's a very, very feature-rich system, and it enables us to do some cool things. All right, so we have Hop God, barrel-aged Hop God. And I'll tell you what, we'll start with Sam this time, and we'll peel back to Tyson for the technical side of it. But we'll do our best to fill you in.
So yeah, this is the Barrel Aged Hop God. We do two versions of this beer. We have a draft version that's isn't aged in the Chardonnay barrels, and then we have this version which has been in the, as we've said before, the second use Chardonnay barrels for 6 months. We blend a little bit of fresh beer back into the aged beer, just to kind of brighten it up and bring some of that nose and especially the hop character back. This was my first beer that I encountered with the brewery that they had done in the barrel aging program. This is probably my favorite of our Chardonnay barrel aged beers. I like them all, but this is probably the one that I like the most. I guess I don't know what else to say about it.
You want to throw anything on there before I take the Lazy Susan and spin it?
No, I think Sam describes it really well. Again, this is a beer that mathematically we'll probably talk somewhere along the line about the hop factor. Mathematically, the hop factor is just off the charts, literally. But the yeast strain and the aging give it this amazing characteristic that makes it very easy to drink and very enjoyable to a much broader audience than the hop factor might implicate.
All right, down to the technical wing.
Well, I won't talk too much about technical things, but the Hop God for us kind of has an interesting history and story. We traveled to San Diego several years ago for the Craft Brewers Conference and had the pleasure of visiting Green Flash. And we were pretty impressed by a beer. I think maybe it's fairly new for them at the time, but it's called Le Freak. And about 6 months later, after returning from San Diego, Paul said to me, he's like, "Hey, remember that beer Le Freak? I think you should make something like that." And of course, I have only tasted it once, 6 months ago. Maybe had 4 ounces of it.
Makes sense.
Go ahead. And guys, we're adjusting here for just a second. We actually plugged our audio out into an amp, so we'll see if we completely blow things up here or if it's working. If you could just say hello, we'll figure it out.
So I was wondering.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
You just gave a really nice potential name for one of your future beers. Idle in Japan. Sounds like a great beer title, doesn't it? And since you're obviously into imaginative titles.
I'll give you some other anecdotal stuff that kept me up at night. I had the opportunity to travel to see it, and I couldn't. I still had the day job. I could get away for the time it took and do so without people knowing. But I had quite a collection of JPEG images to figure out whether or not the brewery was what we needed. We also got fortunate, and the individual who installed it in Japan was also kind of half consulting for us on the side. So we had a good read on the system, but my greatest fear was that when we received it, all of those JPEG images were actually of a miniature system that fit into a shoebox. Since it was prepaid, I think that was the scariest thing we did.
I don't know if you know Brad McQuay at Newland System, but he has a model brewery that he takes around to shows.
The Ninkasi Brewery.
Barbie brewery, because that's the scale. And he sticks a Barbie in it. It's built to that scale, and I took a photograph and did just that, sent it back to the office, and they thought it was a big brewery. Yeah, I really like the biscuity finish on this. You were talking about putting some malt backbone in it, and it's really got a nice, biscuit, maybe Belgian biscuit type flavor. It's really great.
I think that's probably coming more from the barrel and the Chardonnay than the malt we're using.
Yeah.
Because we don't use any type of biscuity malts in that beer, so that's some barrel character coming through, and probably some yeast character.
So you guys have enough beer to go around there, or is it getting down? See, we can't see the guys on the right. I mean, they're like slamming it and high-fiving, aren't they?
Yeah, we have plenty of beer. All right, so what would you suggest we go to next? We have Responsibly and Black Betty left.
Well, I think we're going to finish with Responsibly, given the stature of that beer. But Black Betty, I'll give that one to Tyson immediately. That's one of his originally homebrewed beers that we kind of groomed into a larger stature.
Yeah, as Paul mentioned, obviously before I got into brewing professionally, I was a home brewer, and Black Betty started out at home on the stovetop. I think it was originally maybe kind of supposed to be a Old Rasputin knockoff, which has always been one of my favorite imperial stouts. So over the years, it's transformed a little bit from that original recipe as we adapted it to the hops we can get and the malts that we use here at Nebraska Brewing Company. But it's always been one of my favorites. I don't know if we ever really brewed it on a large scale here until we put it in barrels. I think that was kind of our initial concept, was to put this beer into whiskey barrels and see what happened. What I like about this particular stout compared to some other stouts on the market they're doing the same thing. Ours is a lot hoppier, not nearly as syrupy. I'm not really into syrupy beers, so we try to keep things a little bit more drinkable. At 9%, it's big but not huge, and has a real nice roasty and kind of hoppy character with that whiskey cutting through as well.
The whiskey, there's a little history here too. We were at, inspiration comes in many forms, right? We were at Great American Beer Fest a few years back, and sitting on the patio at Falling Rock, and Flying Dog happened to be passing out a couple experimental sample beers, and one of the beers that was handed to me, it might have been a brown, but the vanilla nose was massive. And there was a craft distillery in the area that I must not name, or their attorneys will say that we're benefiting from their terroir. But we figured out where to get the barrels, and we wanted to experiment with that vanilla character. And this Black Betty was an experiment that we think hit dead on after the first effort. So we've actually taken the craft whiskey character, and in a second use fashion again, we use that same barrel for our barley wine Fathead. You guys have anything you want to add?
No, great beer.
We're not just panning the crowd. We're still smashing our hop god.
It's just a good. It's a great beer. This is one that people they love. They wait for its release, not just here locally, but across the country. We had some folks travel in last week, I think it was, from North Carolina. They were in town for a wedding. They could no longer find Black Betty in North Carolina. They were hoping to find it here. Sadly, we were out, but we did introduce them to the beer that we'll talk about next, Responsibly, and they fell as much in love with Responsibly as they did Black Betty. So that was a win, I think.
Yeah, definitely. When we have people coming in that are looking for beers, this is usually the first thing they ask for if they're from out of town and coming through. They want to find Black Betty, and unfortunately, everybody else usually finds it before they do. So.
Well, I think you've done a really good job of avoiding the two biggest problems of stouts of this caliber. As you mentioned earlier, you can get into that cloying, syrupy flavor, which is unpleasant, and at the opposite end is the espresso licking the ashtray type flavor. Also sucks. This is it's a beautiful beer. It's right down in the middle with a nice marriage of the dryness and the toastiness. So.
Thank you.
We have a lot of fun with the Betty series of beers, I guess I would call it. We've done a Little Betty, which is kind of the unoaked version. Once we did a second runnings batch called Itty Bitty Betty. We have a barrel that went bad stashed away in the corner that we've dubbed Ugly Betty, but I don't think it'll see the light of day. And
it's too ugly.
Yeah, she's gotten pretty ugly with the age she has on her now. And most recently we did Sexy Betty, which was a really small batch that we did in cognac barrels. And people really love that. It has just that same base beer, but a smoother, more delicate barrel character that we hope to repeat someday.
You have a great tasting with all of these beers. I mean, this would be a riot running all the Bettys.
Yeah. It'd be great if we could do it all in one night sometime.
A flight of Bettys. That would be a riot.
Yeah, if I remember the scores right, the three beers that we've gone through, I think they're 96 through 99 points on rate beer. Actually, yeah. So it would be they're 98 and 99. Our lowest scoring rate beer right now is Apricot à Poivre. It's also one of our newest, so I don't just have that many people encounter it yet.
The other thing is that, I don't know, a lot of times you'll see in barrel aging, especially beers in this genre, are bourbon, and we tend to, I don't know if it's that we don't like the bourbon barrels. We really like the flavors and the characters that are imparted in the whiskey more than the bourbon. I think a lot of times bourbon is overdone, and it's just the beer's boozy and just overpowered by the bourbon sometimes. And we think the whiskey barrels here really do a great job of just, imparting just the right characteristics to make it a really, really great beer that you can sit and drink.
We're fans of subtlety.
That's why we make Hop God.
Hop God actually got its name just because of the mathematical bitterness. It actually originally, I think, came in at about 108 IBUs, and we were struggling for a name, and when you drive in a pickup, that's where the names finally get imparted upon you from the gods, and Hop God kind of rang true, and it stuck.
Great name.
All right, you guys ready to head on to the next guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're excited about this one.
So Responsibly, as you have it, it's still in an Inception series bottle, and actually we still have a few on the shelf. This one was just released. Our whole Inception series line, these are the experiments. We don't actually intend to ever make them again. So far, the experiments have gone well. We chuckle because, like Ugly Betty, had we bottled it, that would have been one that we'd say, well, we had one in the lineup that probably didn't work the way we'd hoped. But I joked earlier about that craft distillery and the terroir issue. It actually helped us create Responsibly indirectly. They were purchased by another organization, and the barrels that we had been fortunate enough to use kind of dried up in the marketplace. And I was in Denver, excuse me, actually to pick up barrels, and I couldn't get them. The supply was dry. I thought I had my barrels, and I had time to kill, so I started driving all over the place, just meeting other brewers that were friends of ours. I happened to drop in at Crooked Stave and chat with Chad out there, and he says, "Hey man, come in the back." And we walked over to this 50-year-old French cognac barrel, and he pulled the bung out, and I stuck my nose in there and went, "Holy cow, that's an awesome aroma." And he said, "There's a few left." Cigar City actually picked up a few right before me, so we were fortunate. I had to drive all the way back. Met with a barrel broker out there, scored 3 of these barrels, and we came back here and started trying to figure out, based on the profiles that we think we're going to get out of that barrel, what beers would be aptly suited for a marriage there. And we thought a Belgian quad would work pretty well, and so you're drinking that Belgian quad right now, and we'll head back to the technical side here to see yeast characteristics and fermentation. But Tyson had a good time with this one.
Yeah, the part of the story that Paul leaves out is, as head brewer, I was actually on vacation and totally off the grid in the mountains somewhere when he was out shopping for barrels. So I literally came back to the brewery after vacation and stumbled into these humongous cognac barrels and had no idea what I was going to do with them. Yeah, so Sexy Betty was the first thing to come out of that. And then we kind of dreamed up this big Belgian dark strong, or quad, however you want to call it, to go in there. We used quite a bit of Belgian candy syrup, obviously, and the cognac barrel, it's hard to describe the character of those barrels. To me, it reminds me of like a freshly baked oatmeal cookie. It has this kind of vanilla, but kind of bready, toasty character that's really, really interesting.
I think another thing in the character with those cognac barrels that I always find is that there's like I kind of describe it as like a library character. Like there's like some kind of leather and some. I used to work in a book warehouse, so things always smell like paper to me for some reason. It smells like, to me, it smells like old books and nice leather. Like if you're at some rich guy's house smoking cigars in his, library and study. It always kind of reminds me of that too.
Yeah. We're all commenting how that the alcohol of this beer doesn't come through at all.
Yeah, we generally try to mash and ferment things to keep the alcohol somewhat hidden, even in these big beers. I think in our lineup, this is probably definitely the booziest, as it should be at 12%. But you're right, it's not it could be much more hot than it is.
This was one of those projects that sort of all the pieces came together at separate times, but fell into a very nice little, puzzle. We talked about the barrels showing up and us starting to experiment with the cognac barrels. We thought what would be a great beer in after we put Sexy Betty into them. And then our son, who, little shout out to Connor, our 17-year-old, he came downstairs one night at our house and he said, "I think you guys should name a beer responsibly. That way you guys can tell people to drink responsibly." And I wasn't sure if I should be really proud or very afraid. But all the pieces kind of came together, and the result of that is responsibly.
Yeah, and I think I heard Tyson talking about those barrels showing up when he was on vacation. Paul was out of town, and it was just Kim and I here, and she came up to me, and I don't even remember what I was doing, and she said, "Hey Sam, what do you think about cognac barrels?" And I said, "Well, cognac barrels sound awesome." And so she walks off with her phone back by her mouth and says, "Sam said they sound awesome." And so I thought about texting or trying to call Tyson while he was out of town, but I figured I'd just let him find out when he got back from vacation. But I think they've turned out really nice, yeah.
But Paul has a good habit of dreaming things up and then tells everybody go, and we all figure out how to make it all happen, how to make it work.
They're pointing at Dan in the background there. There must be something happening there on that in a similar fashion. I think you guys froze on us. You still there? You got to put another quarter in somewhere.
Yeah, we're all alone.
All alone on the internet.
Well, we have our beer, so we're not really.
Well, this is where we should drink.
Yeah.
Stropito. They're probably still here.
What if everybody else
Probably.
on the internet can see us?
I know.
Let's start pounding beers. They'll be back. But there's some irony. They were accusing Dan of being that person, and somebody pulled the plug, apparently.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to hit refresh. It looks like we're still up.
Yeah, that works good.
Should we make everybody sick?
Hey,
There they are.
We're back. Crap, we were just going to start doing really entertaining things. So here's there's a little bit more to the story. So we created these beers with these 50-year-old French cognac barrels, and we really desired the ability to make them again, and we're really hardcore about being able to replicate the beers batch over batch. So apparently we're good at beer, and we might be decent at wine, but distilled spirits we came up a little short, or at least I did. So I started going to the barrel brokers, and in a scorched earth fashion, I was looking for cognac barrels. Guys, get me cognac barrels. And to their credit, they kept responding with, we can't get you cognac. Well, they could. They were insanely expensive. And they said, you know, instead of cognac, why don't you use brandy? And my response was, no, the beer was made with cognac. So apparently, and maybe you guys can help me fill in the blanks here, apparently, like champagne, sparkling wine is made in the United States. Cognac being made in France, brandy being made in the United States, it's an issue of place. So we are on the path of these particular barrels that we need, and we're scheduling in production of these beers probably beginning in about April of next year, so that they're laid in and ready for sale and distribution in October.
Wow.
So way too much information, right?
That's good. That's good.
I'm curious. Barrel brokers. Is this a new vocation?
Well, so here's the rub and the problem with brokerages, and we're extremely careful, especially on the Chardonnay side. On the whiskey side, I get right to a guy in a garage in the middle of the night, and I know what I'm getting. On the wine side, I have a very, very precise specification, and I'm confident that we're getting the same barrel, the same age of barrel, and without giving away all the crap that I search for. I think the big concern in there is when you're dealing with a broker, you've got to be sure that you're getting the same exact barrel to your specifications, because they have the ability to source barrels wherever they can get them. You know, you can order in a supply of barrels, and 20% are what you expected to get, and the rest are, you know, a mixture of whatever they could gather together to meet your order. We have not had that happen yet because we've been extremely careful, but I would imagine, like any industry, there's going to be, you know, some margin of error in that.
But I guess to answer your question, Daniel, I don't know how new this position or this job is in the industry. When it comes to our wine barrels, I think we've always dealt with a broker.
Right, and it's a broker within the wine industry. So that one, now they've discovered that, wow, all these guys are from the brewing side are buying my barrels. It's great for them, because I think they had a large number of them that went out into, you know, this unfortunate secondary side of things, where they went to Home Depots and places that really didn't benefit folks like you and I. And now that they've got brewers out there that are experimenting, as Tyson said, with Chardonnay for the sake of Chardonnay and not for the sake of just souring beers, I think there's, I think what you're going to see, and maybe this is where your articles have already gone, I personally think you're going to see a lot more experimentation off the beaten path, outside of the bourbons, outside of you know, whiskey and the things that quote unquote have already been done. I think there's fertile ground there, and it's going to bear good fruit.
I'm trying to remember. I think it's J.W. Lee's that has a whole series of, I think there may be 8-ounce bottles. Every one of them a distinctly different barrel.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the Mikkeller McKellar thing too, right? Where instead of hops or, you know, isolated ingredients, they're playing with barrels, and I think that's, you know, like any good home brewer, you brew a batch of beer, change one ingredient, you keep varying it a little bit, like a good scientist. That's a fantastic idea.
it's got to be tricky keeping track of the flavor contributions that an individual barrel makes after you use it. I mean, you mentioned earlier a barrel that starts with this beer, then the second time you use it, it goes to that beer, and the third time you use it, it goes to this beer. That's got to be a pretty challenging aspect of being a brewer these days.
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, there's so many of these things that you have to rely on your senses, and there aren't really ways. I mean, maybe if you're a big sophisticated brewery, there's lab techniques, to test for flavor compounds and that in the beer. As small brewers, we're just using our senses and also being as regimented as we can in how we produce the beers. Paul talked about having very specific specifications for the barrels. If we don't ask for a particular type of barrel with so much age and this type of grape, we're going to have varied results. And I think we learned early on that we had to be that specific, and I think it's worked out pretty well for us. We do, obviously, before bottling these beers, we're blending multiple barrels together, and we taste each one of those barrels individually and basically give it a thumb up or a thumb down on whether or not it's going to be included. I think, Paul, you decided we'd probably have about a 5 to 10% failure rate on barrels that get rejected. So it's not a huge amount, but we definitely have to weed out the weaklings or the ones where things just don't go quite right.
Yeah, and that's economically unfortunate. For the most part, our barrel-aged beers, there's, 80 to 100 sitting around us right now, and I don't track them out any further than a year in advance. They're all pre-sold. So when we get down to the point of tasting the individual barrels, as a brewer, we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to make a bottling that's to our taste, quote unquote, perfect. Standard. As a brewery owner, when you have to put a bullet in a barrel and then go back to the distributors that thought they were going to get that beer, that's painful on two fronts. One, you disappoint your own revenue stream, and then not only do you disappoint your distributor, in many cases, because these aren't inexpensive beers, they've turned around and pre-sold them into their marketplace. So you've got retailers out there that might have hyped it, and ultimately, they don't get a few cases of beer, and we feel the pain right back here at the brewery every time we put a bullet in a barrel.
Put a bullet in a barrel. That's there. Wow. You got another beer name there.
Yeah. I don't want to.
I wonder if you had a chance to go to the bourbon guys in Kentucky, like Jim Beam, because the way you're talking, you sound like I got a good tour of how they select barrels to blend to get to Jim Beam, and how they select barrels for things like Book or No, and it's sounding like that's exactly what you're doing. How you mix up the barrels to make sure you get that profile that is already recognized as that beer style. That takes a lot of barrels to do that.
Yeah, it does, and Tyson was going to chime in here, sorry to interrupt, but we've also experimented with new oak barrels out of Missouri, and so these are the barrels that ultimately head to the wine industry, and we're getting them raw. And our experiment, I don't recall the second one, I recall the first one because it was one of those home run experiments. We took a rye IPA, it's also one of Tyson's homebrew creations, and we stuck it into a particular barrel that the barrel manufacturer, the Cooper, told us with this particular type of toast and this oak, you should get a cotton candy character. And to hear descriptors like that and apply them to the beer industry, it's a little counterintuitive, but we tried it, one barrel, and we bottled it. That particular beer didn't even get a label, but we bottled it because we weren't sure exactly what to do with it. We loved it. We entered it into competition at the FOBAB up in Chicago and took a medal away from it. We learned a lot on the fresh or new barrel side as well, and it's almost like a half-life when it comes to oak. Oak survives in beer for a fairly short window of time, relatively speaking, and you can kind of predict when you're still going to experience oak. When we put that beer into the bottle, frankly, we thought we ruined it because it was so incredibly over oaked. I wouldn't call it horrible, but we didn't want to waste the beer, so we bottled it. Then we saw its curve over time, and the oak dropped into a particular palatable zone where not only did we enjoy it, but the judges did too. And as that curve, the oak curve, continued, it fell out of that preferred zone in a fairly rapid sense. So when we go back to our little spreadsheets to know and gain some expertise with it, I think we learned a lot out of that one. So I'm sorry.
So what about the cotton candy?
The cotton candy came through, and in a bizarre fashion, it was another one of those volatile characters that survived up front but didn't survive over time.
Yeah. Back to your comments about blending and kind of taking care of our barrels. I have plenty of friends that work at much larger breweries with huge barrel aging programs, and they do a lot of blending, even of different beers, different barrels, all that to get a target profile. Because we're so small, we don't really have that luxury. We're basically brewing the beer, putting in the barrels that we know from experience are appropriate for that beer, and then we just kind of have to babysit it and decide if it turned out the way we wanted or if it didn't. We don't have a way to correct for things that went wrong, other than to possibly rename it, which we haven't done yet, except maybe Ugly Betty, but that one's not going to come out, I don't think. So
Dead Betty.
Yeah, Dead Betty. But it's much more challenging. We don't have, we just don't have that luxury of having 200 barrels to choose from when we come to packaged beer.
So we should keep our eye out for put a bullet in the barrel beer.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
That was one you didn't like.
We'll let you sample Ugly Betty if you show up here really fast.
Hey, so clearly you haven't been pretty interested in making beer with any sort of bugs in it, have you?
Yeah, I definitely am intrigued by doing that. We had one small release in our Inception series called Microbrew that was more of a kind of unintentional sour or wild ale, I guess you'd call it. Someday I think we'll probably go down that path, but I want to be very deliberate about it and do it on my terms and on purpose. I think unfortunately a lot of small breweries are putting beer in barrels and finding it turns out sour and then trying to convince the consumers that it's amazing sour beer. And I think that's unfortunate because
no, they wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean it's the same. It's the same as the old homebrewer story about how when your beer turns out bad, call it Belgian. I think a lot of small craft brewers are doing that with their so-called sour beers. And I think I have a great love for sour beer, but I think it's something that needs to be done on purpose, and we just don't have the time or the space right now.
That was the case with one of the early microbrews. I think it was Red Hook, one of their first beers, had an infection in it. Michael Jackson just dubbed it a Belgian beer.
Right.
It sold as a Belgian beer for quite a while until they finally cleaned up their brew house.
Sam's back. We'll at least let you see his face again.
Hey. I was fulfilling my draft tech and delivery guy duties.
So what do you have on tap currently in the brewery?
Well, actually, this being our 5th year anniversary week, we haven't been killing these one-off batches on a nightly basis. So we've still got a cask, I believe.
Yep.
Cask of the candy cap mushroom. It's our pumpkin ale with candy cap mushrooms.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. So you got an organic product, right? Mushrooms that impart heavy maple syrup and molasses character into a beer that's just bizarre, and bizarre in a good way. And then yesterday's was
11th hour rye IPA.
Yep. And then today is
today we're doing our Nebraska Indian Black Ale, which is a black IPA I dreamed up about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm really looking forward to tapping it. It's one of my favorites.
So on a personal note, as a brewery, what do you feel about the oxymoronic beer styles?
I embrace them fully. I think it's fun. Why not? I read an article about white stouts the other day. I found that pretty comical.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a local brewery who, in his description of this black IPA, he lists a lot of other beers that he would like to make, including white stouts.
Yeah.
He calls it a light stout.
There was a distillery that mentioned an upcoming product called a white whiskey, and we all were kind of puzzled by that. We're not distillers, but we thought, isn't that just either vodka or moonshine?
Actually,
Moonshine.
it is moonshine. Actually, a friend of mine has a distillery, and you're releasing whiskey before it's aged. And it's apparently the new trend among whiskey heads.
Huh. But yeah, with our black ale, we call it Nebraskadian. When I first started brewing this, was slightly before that whole controversy over naming of black IPAs or Cascadian dark ales or whatever. All of that happened. So when we finally got around to doing it as a seasonal, we thought we'd have a little fun with the name and claim it for our own as Nebraskadian. So try to keep it lighthearted and not take it too seriously.
So these were voted. Our fans, Facebook fans, voted these the beers that we should recreate. And tomorrow's the
pumpkin porter,
and then
pumpkin rye porter.
And then
Because Tyson does love rye.
Indeed.
And then
So do I.
Sam, I'm gonna throw you on here for what would that be? Friday now?
Friday is the
Midnight Ride.
Oh,
No.
the Midnight Ride,
Midnight
which
Ride.
was kind of our take on a Schwartz beer. We didn't do it with lager yeast, added a little rye malt to it, and used some real dark wheat malt to blacken it up. That was a real good seasonal for us. And then
Nebraska.
Saturday's Nebraska Glory, which was kind of our spin on Victory's beer. What was that beer called?
Yakima
Glory.
Right? It's
We
kind
sort of
a-
directly ripped it off.
So if since we're talking about black IPAs, that's sort of a brown IPA, if you will, or an imperial brown ale. And that's going to be the last beer we do for our anniversary week on Saturday night.
Which will be Saturdays actually are the day of our 5th anniversary, the day we open the doors. So it's been a great week, and we're really excited to not only have survived 5 years, but sort of thrived in those 5 years.
If you haven't picked up on
Congratulations
something,
on that.
So what do you
Yes.
think?
Great.
We get back together in 5 years. What do you think you're going to be all about then?
in the next 5, I'm sorry, Dan, I
Yes,
missed it.
yeah.
Oh, the next 5, we're working real hard on trying to package beer, be it cans or bottles. I think our target is cans. When it comes to distribution, I think we've got a good foothold out there in the marketplace. There's some decent beers going out there, and we've got distributors that are pulling a lot harder than we can supply the liquid. So I think it's a natural progression. If we can, then of course, if we assume that barrel-aged beers and draft beers are 20% market share, we hope to drop into that 80% space and hopefully show up at your doorstep. One of the things, if you haven't noticed, what we put on display here and we talked about are big, badass, hoppy beers. And consider the market that we came into. We emerged in, for all intents and purposes, Omaha, Nebraska, and we love our Busch Light and Bud Light fans. We embrace them all. But when they first encountered our pale ales and IPAs, you can imagine the response that we got here locally. So, in fact, anecdotally, we were told by another local brewer we'd never sell one of those beers in this market. And I think those hoppier beers now are some of our more rapid selling and better embraced beers here in the brew pub. So we've converted a local market, and I think we've done okay.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we thought early on is, one, everyone talks about, brew beers that are true to style. We said that, we do it. But I think the other big thing is that you can't underestimate the palate of not just your customer today, but who that customer is going to be 6 months from now or a year from now, because this particular market, like a lot of other markets, are Busch Light and Bud Light drinkers. Those are people that are just waiting to be introduced to the right beer. And I can't tell you how many times we've given a beer to somebody and said, try this, you might actually like it. And their first reaction is, that doesn't suck. And we're like, okay, we can work with that. And so I think don't underestimate the palate of the people that are going to be your future customers, because or guests or beer drinkers or comrades, however you want to look at it. It's a growing market, and just to be able to get out there and educate people and give them the opportunity to try something new is amazing.
And for our Anheuser-Busch distributors, we love you guys.
Absolutely.
Hey, is that local brewer you mentioned, are they in business still?
Well, they are. They've changed shape a bit over time, and lo and behold, guess what they're brewing now? IPAs and bigger beers. So I think they see that the market can, accept some change.
Good for you.
Good for you. That speaks a lot to the quality of your stuff.
Any other last questions?
What do you think, guys? I'll show the panel here again.
Yeah, I
Questions
just
for us?
would like to add, Paul talked about the market we entered 5 years ago. It's been really fun to see our local market grow and change. We used to joke that we could count all the beer geeks in the Omaha area basically on 2 hands. And now we go to events and there are people jazzed about beer that we've never met before. And it's a really exciting time. So I think the next 5 years, there's going to be a huge explosion of not only enthusiasm, but also quality craft beer coming out of our market.
So back to Sam down here, who's been lobbying for a Mastodon sponsorship for years.
Right. I guess I would just follow up with kind of what Tyson said there. I've been drinking and involved with craft beer for almost 20 years now, which is just crazy to me to think about drinking beer that long. But I think one of the things we're really good at too is just doing outreach and getting out into the community, being at events, getting people to know us. And I think a big thing that's helped us too is that people trust us. People that come in here to drink beer or to eat food may not want to try a certain style of beer, but after a while they're more open to you if they know you, they know your personality, and you know that we're not here to steer anybody wrong. We want you to enjoy yourself and have beer, and I think just getting people's trust by making a really quality product, I think really has really helped us, and is going to continue to help us in that next 5-year window too. Yeah.
Excellent.
That makes sense?
Yeah, well, I think, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to do things like this because, let's face it, we are from Nebraska, and we get it less now, but still get it a little bit. People say, really, from Nebraska? Do they make good beer in Nebraska? And we say, hell yes, we make good beer in Nebraska. And, so for us to be able to not only extend the local market and our reputation there, but to get out to people, via avenues like this one and say, this is who we are. We're making great beer. It can be made in Nebraska. It can be made in Iowa. It can be made in Kansas. There's some great breweries out there, and to be a part of this whole community at large is amazing.
All right, I think I've already talked your ear off, so any parting questions for us?
Well, I wonder if you have any questions for us.
I'm curious. Of course, we're here in the Midwest, and I'm also the president of the Nebraska Craft Brewers Guild, and there's a lot of breweries here, and we're all, attempting to do great things. So last year, I think there was some coverage. Let's pour some more beer here while we're.
I'm just gonna housekeeping and get Tyson some beer.
Some other periodicals, I think, picked up on the fact that breweries from within the Midwest were winning medals, and I think it's a great statement, and to support Kim, as someone else said it before us. Good beer can come from anywhere. What do you guys see? Nationally, welcome back. We have 2 of you guys now.
Yes.
How do you feel the Midwest is doing overall? Do you think it's an issue of location, or do you think it's just more, if there's a good brewer out there, they're going to make good beer?
I think you're correct in both. There definitely has been evolution in different parts of the country. The Southeast historically was late. New York and LA were notorious for being behind curves. So different sectors of the country are coming on at different parts of the different times. Having said that, there are also enough people in every of the country that isn't into craft beer. Are there enough of those people? I don't know. But I think you've got two dynamics going.
I guess on a side note, we should also plug All About Beer's Beer Fest that is being rescheduled into the area, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yes. We look forward to having you there next year.
Good. We welcome it and absolutely appreciate it. And I'll tell you, it's one thing to have a beer fest and get good beer and enjoy the crowds, but what the people here really value are the educators that come in alongside the beer. To have people in that can speak not only to the industry, but to the extent, they can explain the beers. And we're always looking for educators that can make that pool of aficionados that much broader.
That's basically our job. We're for 20 years we've been working to teach people about beer quality, beer appreciation. That's what we do for a living. You make the beer, we talk the beer.
Well, good. I hope the rest of the people in the room, I know your bottles are empty, but I hope they had some beers on the side to tolerate us for 1 hour. We're thrilled that you guys at least took the time to pay attention to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise, and congratulations on your week.
Cheers. Thank you, guys. We'll see you.